Good evening, everyone. It's 6:30 p.m. and I'll call this meeting to order. And as we begin, I'll ask that everyone please silence their cell phones and other electronic devices. And I will begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. This land has a rich history and is covered by the Williams Treaties of 1923. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous peoples and express our gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on this territory. We commit to honoring and respecting the land, its history, and its current stewards as we strive to strengthen our relationships with Indigenous communities and work toward right relations together. We move to the approval of the agenda. It's moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Whereas, that Council approve the September 18th, 2023 Council agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And I will note that Councillor Butwell has sent regrets for this meeting and that Councillor Wheeldon is joining us electronically on Zoom. Members of Council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. Are there any announcements this evening? I have three. A couple of them are on sad notes. Our neighbors in Crammy Township are mourning the loss of their CAO's spouse who was killed in an accident over the weekend. This loss has had an impact throughout their municipality, and I have asked our CAO to provide whatever resources we can to help them during this difficult time, as it is affecting many of their municipal staff. We'll also note that flags are flying at half staff in memory of Joan Pettengill outside our municipal offices. Joan was a local educator and the spouse of long-serving mayor of the former town, Bill Pettengill. And on a significantly happier note, I had the opportunity to go out and see the Girl Guides on Thursday, who are launching their cookie campaign for the fall. So everyone, if somebody knocks on your door, buy a cookie. And they'll be out at the local grocery stores as well, I imagine. To the adoption of the minutes, moved by Councillor Whereas, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, that Council adopt the September 5th, 2023 Council meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We have no public meeting this evening. We have one delegation coming to us virtually. It is Sue Shikaze. I hope I'm saying your last name right, Sue, the health promoter from and environmental health at Haliburton, Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit. Sue, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen to so that everyone can see my presentation. So let me just go ahead and do that. So my name is Sue Shikaze, and I'm a health promoter at the HKPR District Health Unit. I work in our environmental health department, and I am the lead on HKPR's climate change work, which is what I'm here to speak to you today, this evening about. So I'll just very briefly talk about the connection between climate change and health. I'll talk a little bit about the vulnerability and adaptation assessment that we released earlier this year, a little bit about vulnerability, climate change and health in our district, adaptation, and what's coming next. So for a bit of context, climate change is recognized globally as a threat to our health. Typically, climate change is framed as an environmental concern, and I think it's only been more recent that researchers and the literature have started to make the connection more directly to human health. And so, for example, the World Health Organization has said that climate change is the greatest public health challenge of the 21st century. There's annually the Lancet Commission issues a report on climate change and health. Similarly, in Canada, our Chief Public Health Officer, who releases a report every year in 2022, made the focus of her report on climate change and public health's role in relation to climate change, given that climate change threatens the planet and human health. In Ontario, public health work is directed by the Ontario Public Health Standards. And in 2018, boards of health were directed to assess health impacts related to climate change in our jurisdictions. And so that's the work that I've been tasked with starting in about 2018. And at a local level, what that looks like is the development of a climate change health vulnerability and adaptation assessment, because adaptation to climate change is most effectively carried out at the local level. It's certainly a global problem and a global crisis, and it affects us locally. And we've seen some of that over the past year with, for example, some extreme heat events and the wildfire smoke that we saw earlier in the summer as well. So our health vulnerability assessment is 2 phases. The first phase was completed and released in June, and the executive summary of that assessment report is attached as part of your council package. And as part of that assessment, we looked at what the current climate situation is in relation to these 6 hazards in HKPR district. So we looked at extreme temperatures, both warm and cold, extreme weather and natural events. So that includes things like severe storms and natural events that occur because of those severe storms. So things like floods, wildfires, drought, that kind of thing. Vector-borne diseases, we focused primarily on Lyme disease, which is carried by ticks, and West Nile virus, carried by mosquitoes. Safe food and water, because there are climate impacts to our drinking and recreational water and to our food supply and food chain. Air quality and exposure to solar ultraviolet radiation. And these are identified in the research as the primary health impacts of climate change, which is why we focused on these. So we wanted to understand the current situation. Who's most at risk? What's the present climate situation in HKPR? And also, how is that projected to change? So there's a really great website if you're interested. It's called climatedata.ca, and you can zero in on a municipal level and look at what the current situation is, and then what projections are given different climate emissions scenarios. And so that's how we got some of that projection data. Then we sort of looked and compared that to certain illnesses and overlaid those 2 things to project what the future health impacts of climate change might look like in our district, unless we take some protective action. We also looked at programs at the health unit and in the community that contribute to building adaptive capacity or to making sure that our communities and our population is resilient. So what makes people more at risk? It is called a vulnerability assessment because we really wanted to look at whose health is most at risk. Climate change will affect all of us, but it's clear that certain populations will be impacted more than others, in much the same way that the COVID-19 pandemic had different impacts on different populations. So vulnerability, or being at risk, is a combination of 3 things: exposure, sensitivity, and ability to adapt, or adaptive capacity. So sensitivity are individual conditions that are identified as putting somebody more at risk. So age, people who are older, people who are younger are more likely to be impacted. So for example, in an extreme heat event, older adults, young children, more sensitive. Also, people with pre-existing health conditions. So if you've got a heart condition or a breathing disorder, you're more likely to be sensitive as well. Again, to things like extreme heat or air quality alerts like we had earlier this year. Exposure, we can think about in 3 different ways. There's a physical environment that a person lives in. Maybe they work outdoors, they do a lot of outdoor recreation, so they're going to be exposed in that regard. But also the type of neighborhood that they live in. So you may have heard of the urban heat island effect. That's, communities where there's lots of pavement and concrete that absorb heat and take a long time to cool down. So people that live in those areas more at risk during a heat event. And also the indoor environment. And so that's where the type of housing that someone lives in puts them more at risk. There's also social exposure. So that's the social determinants of health, things like income, education, the type of employment that a person has. And then there's societal or more systemic things that are exposure risks as well. And these are things like racism, discrimination, colonialism, things that we know impact people and put their health more at risk and make them more likely to be living in, for example, poor housing, low income situations, so these things are all interconnected. So the third piece of the formula is ability to adapt or adaptive capacity. And so what we want to do is try to address some of the sensitivity and exposure conditions in order to build people's adaptive capacity. And that's the purpose of the work in public health, because we want to protect people's health. So just very briefly, what we found in our assessment was in looking at those climate hazards, without taking adaptive action, and given the climate trajectory that we're on, we will see more emergency department visits due to things like heat-related illness, food and waterborne illness, more likely to see injuries due to floods and extreme weather events, worsening of chronic illnesses. So again, people who have cardio conditions or respiratory conditions, increased risk of poor birth outcomes, increased risk of Lyme and other vector-borne diseases. And we do see increases in the number of cases of Lyme disease every year, and we have for the last several years. Increased risk of lung cancer, and that's due to poor air quality, risk of skin cancer, and increased impacts on mental health. There's a growing body of evidence that shows that climate change and these climate hazards have an impact on mental health in a variety of ways. So the good news is that the health unit already does work that contributes to adaptation. And I think about these things in sort of an immediate sense, and also in a bigger picture, or addressing more of the root causes. So for example, we do regular monitoring and surveillance of ticks and mosquitoes to keep track of where they are and how the range of those insects is expanding or changing. We test recreational water, so that's our beaches, to make sure that they're safe for swimming. We do lots of public outreach, education, and skill building. So for example, how people can protect themselves from ticks and mosquitoes. And we do emergency planning and response, both as a health unit and in partnership with our municipalities. In terms of addressing more of the root causes, we have staff who do work on poverty reduction from a variety of perspectives, advocating for healthy policy, things like advocating for healthy community design. And the literature is also clear that building adaptive capacity and taking action against the climate health impacts requires collaboration across multiple sectors. So public health has a role to play, certainly, but we can't do all the work alone. So it's really important that we collaborate with community partners like municipalities in order to make sure that we all have to identify the roles that we all play in protecting health. So some examples of collaborative climate health action that we currently have in relationship with municipalities are, for example, with climate change plans. We've contributed a health perspective to climate change plans at some of our municipalities. We review and provide comments on land use and community design policies and planning. So for example, site plans and plans of subdivision. Also related to that is transportation planning. So making comments and recommendations related to things like active transportation. We have an emergency planning and management coordinator who works with municipalities on emergency planning and preparedness. And we also partner on things like poverty reduction, agriculture, and initiatives and education and awareness raising. So the next steps are currently sharing the findings and sharing the results, as I am with you this evening, and continuing to build and strengthen community partnerships. So that's a big part of the work that I'm doing right now, is reaching out to various community agencies who work with some of those more at-risk populations, with the end goal to develop an adaptation action plan for HKPR that identifies what we need to do moving forward in order to ensure that our programs and services are addressing the health of our communities, and who we need to partner with in order to do that. So this is just a very rough timeline, and I'm hoping to have a draft report completed by the end of this year or early next year. And what can you do? Well, you have a copy of the executive summary, so I do encourage you to share the summary and the key findings with your colleagues and your constituents. Also included in your package is a briefing note that highlights in some greater detail how some municipal initiatives also contribute to addressing health. So there's lots of co-benefits of work that you're already doing that builds adaptive capacity related to health. And also just helping to build awareness of the links between climate change, health, and municipal priorities. And in that regard, I get my one request would be that if there is a staff municipal liaison that could be identified, that could be a point person for me to connect with related to this topic, climate change and health, that would be really great. And that wraps it up. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shikaze. We appreciate the information you've presented, and I will open the floor to members of council for questions of clarification on your presentation. Members of council? Councillor Wheeldon?
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Great presentation. I appreciate that. The question that I was going to ask is the question that you asked at the end as well. Who do you interface with at our municipality? Do you have any examples from other municipalities as to who you have as a local contact?
Yes, for example, I spoke with the town of Coburg last week, and the planning reached out to me. So it's often someone in planning, because sometimes that's where the climate change or sustainability initiatives sort of rest. Or if there is like an environmental coordinator position, that would be another as well. I know in smaller municipalities, staff wear lots of hats. So I think also it's someone who has an interest as well.
Thank you for that. I think maybe we would get the CAO to turn his mind to who that staff contact might be. And I don't expect an answer this evening, Bob, but perhaps we get you to turn your mind to that and have that person reach out to Sue at some point in the near future.
That would be great. Thank you.
And Sue, we're having trouble stopping your screen share. I wonder if
Oh, sorry, I need to do
okay.
that. Hang on, let me just.
Oh, we got it.
Oh,
now we
got it. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Wright.
Just more of a comment than a question. I just want to say thank you for what you've kind of highlighted for us here, because it's pretty clear that these environmental impacts are hitting us across multiple areas of our lives, not just, you know, the smoke that we see in the air, but the health impacts and the impacts into our pocketbooks and how it affects our insurance premiums and all kinds of things. So thank you for laying out the health impacts for us.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anything else from council? Well, thank you again, Sue. We appreciate that. And that with a motion from Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley and Councillor Whereas, that council received the presentation from Sue Shikaze, Health Promoter, Environmental Health at the Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. Any further discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Brings us to citizens' comments. I don't see anyone online. Mr. Green? Very well, thank you. Before we head into staff reports, Mr. Miller, I wonder if you would introduce us to your seatmate there.
Certainly. I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Vicki Hallam. Vicki's the new manager of Parks and Recreation. She started her position on the 5th, so it's almost 2 weeks. And
she's still here. Well, congratulations, Vicki, and welcome to the municipality of Brighton. May you have a long and a fun-filled career. So, thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. So we go into staff reports. Our first report is the Brighton DWQMS Management Review Report. Director Whiteman, we've read the report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
No, I do not.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley that Try that again. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley that Council receive the staff information report dated September 18th, 2023 regarding the Brighton Drinking Water System DWQMS Management Review Report on the Municipality of Brighton's drinking water system. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wright.
My question would be regarding the action items arising from this management review at the very end of the report. Are there any deadlines on the items outstanding?
Director Whiteman.
Yes, there are. We are engaged with the Peterborough Utilities company that oversees many of the regulations that we are required to meet. And we're trying to stay within the Ontario regulations, of course. And we are, I believe, in lockstep with what is required and will continue to do so.
Thank you. Does that answer satisfy your question?
It just doesn't, I understand that you're working towards deadlines. Like, do we have actual deadlines that you're working with? Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, continually.
Sorry?
Continually.
Continually.
Yes.
Good enough. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of council? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. The purchase of the 2023 Kubota skid steer. Director Whiteman, we've read this report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
No, I do not.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley that council receive the staff report purchase of a 2023 Kubota skid steer, and further that council approve the purchase of a new Kubota compact track loader with snow blower, rotary cutter, skid grader, grapple bucket, and snow plow and loader boom attachments for the total cost of $113,819.97, including the expense portion of the HST. Is there any discussion? Councillor Fredis.
Through the chair to Director Whiteman. I noted in here that you've acquired this through the cooperative purchasing with Canoe procurement group, and I think that's great. Do you have any feel or indication of the savings that purchasing cooperative might have generated over and above us doing it on our own?
Director Whiteman.
I think they have more competitive advantage on some items, not all items. I would not, I don't know particularly those items that of note, but I do feel that they furnish that kind of competitive advantage in many instances, given that we cannot get product or we cannot get equipment on time, and in many instances because of that the costs are more prohibitive. So I do feel that there are cost advantages given that many municipalities are also going down this road as well.
But we're not able to say what the savings may have been, Director?
I will pass that on to Linda. Maybe Linda knows best better than I do.
Director Whitfield, any idea?
We can certainly find out. I'll contact our customer service rep from Canoe tomorrow, and we'll find out what that percentage of savings was on that.
Appreciate that. Would you share that information with council by email?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to our final staff report, the 2024 budget timetable report. Director Whitfield, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
No, I do not.
I have a motion moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Fredis. The council received the staff report and approved the 2024 budget timetable report. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to the council follow-up list. Members of council, do you have any comments before I read the motion? Motion before me is moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Fredis, that council receive the council follow-up list as presented. Any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And we move into motions. This motion was brought to us as a notice of motion at the first meeting in September. And Councillor Wheeldon, as the mover, would you like to read this motion?
I would. Thank you for giving me that option.
You're welcome. And I'll just note that in the absence of Councillor Butwell, this has been seconded by Councillor Whereas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councillor Whereas. Whereas affordable housing is in short supply and prohibitively expensive for many residents in Brighton and Northumberland County more broadly, and whereas the number of residents who are precariously housed or experiencing homelessness is increasing, along with issues associated with homelessness such as drug use, drug poisoning, and petty crime, and whereas the social costs of homelessness are borne primarily by those who are experiencing homelessness, but are also shared by the community through impacts on community safety and well-being, tourism and economic development, and more, and whereas the institutional costs of homelessness and related issues are spread between the province, upper tier municipalities, and lower tier municipalities, with no one level taking responsibility for the issue or response, and with no concerted collaboration between jurisdictions toward more robust solutions. And whereas there is a clear need to provide a more coordinated approach to this worsening crisis, as the county social services team alone cannot carry an issue that has both causes and impacts beyond their jurisdiction. Therefore, be it resolved that the municipality of Brighton initiate an intermunicipal ad hoc committee to examine lower tier expenditures and bylaws related to homelessness, to identify opportunities for better alignment with county housing and homelessness programs, and invite participation in this group by representatives of other Northumberland municipalities and the county to report back to respective councils before the end of 2023. And further, be it resolved, the municipality of Brighton call upon Northumberland County Council to initiate increased efforts toward the issue of housing and homelessness, including increasing the number and diversity of shelter spaces in recognition of the sharp rise in local need and the many barriers to accessing shelter, and accelerating the timeline of the housing and homelessness plan. And further, be it resolved that this motion be circulated to all other Northumberland municipalities.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeldon. That's moved by Councillor Wheeldon and it's seconded by Councillor Fredis. I'll open the floor for discussion or questions. Councillor Wright.
Through you to Councillor Wheeldon. Wondering, do you know what the current numbers are of the homeless situation in Northumberland and what that's increased by just in like the last year or two?
Sure. The county maintains a by name list, which is that once a year they go out to all the places that people are known to congregate when they don't have shelter, and they identify people by name. And I don't have exact numbers on that. It's difficult to get exact numbers on that even for the county. I know that the last I had heard, I want to say in the 80s. There are 24 spaces at Transition House, which is the only emergency shelter in Northumberland. So with about 80 people who are known to either be homeless or couch surfing or otherwise precariously housed, it's difficult to say that we have enough capacity in shelter. The trouble is that we measure capacity to deal with homelessness based on how many spaces there might be open at Transition House on a given night. So as long as there is 1 or 2 spaces open at Transition House, we're deemed to be doing our job. And absolutely nothing against county staff, but those numbers don't necessarily add up.
I think that's a fair comment because there are often 1 or 2 beds vacant at Transition House on any given evening. So statistically, it would appear we don't have a homeless problem because of that. And of course, our funding is tied to such things as this from the province. So, or the county's funding is tied to those things. So all sorts of systemic issues going on. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Wright.
Okay, so if we have 24 beds and maybe 22 are taken up on a nightly basis, where are these other people currently seeking shelter?
I
I just want to paint the picture of where everything is happening.
So the first thing that Transition House does when somebody comes to them is tries to find another place for them. They call this diversion. And so they say, if you know any other place you can go, we want to help you get there to make sure that we can have a space for someone who has literally nowhere else to go. Recently, there was a home that was deemed unsafe for habitation in Cobourg. There were, I think, 6 residents of that home. But about 20 other people were known to sleep there on a fairly regular basis. And so when those 6 people were suddenly evicted due to health concerns in the basement of the building, it led to an encampment of about 22 people on Cobourg's West Beach. But they were not allowed to camp on municipal property. And so Cobourg, rightly or wrongly, wanted to enforce its bylaws to ensure that there were no encampments on public property. So those people were evicted from there, and so they moved to county property, and county likewise evicted those people. And so at a certain point, I'm not sure where they are anymore, but there are people who, when they seek shelter, if they can't find a regular bed at a shelter, if they can't find transitional housing, which is few and far between, many of them choose to try and shelter themselves the best that they can, often in tents in the back corner of a public park somewhere or things like that. And to that point, there are people who are sheltering in peace in Brighton. Homelessness is not a visible problem in Brighton, but it does exist here. And precariously housed people do live here. People who are couch surfing or squatting or things like that. So this issue only seems to come to a head when it is no longer invisible anymore. And unfortunately, that's usually a sign that it's gone on for far too long and has reached a crisis point for a lot of people.
One more.
Me again. Can you guesstimate, or has there been any study or looking at what the potential for this could possibly look like with winter approaching?
Yeah, I mean, this is the issue every year around this time. For context, I used to serve on the board of Transition House. And so this time, a few years ago, I was working with some people trying to find a place for a warming room because this is a seasonal thing where we set up a space where people can just come in overnight to be out of the cold during the coldest hours. It's not actually a shelter. People don't really get to sleep there, but it's there to just keep people from freezing to death. This past year, there was a concerted effort to build sleeping cabins, just to provide insulated 1-bedroom, no services containers for people so that they wouldn't freeze to death. That met with a lot of red tape, which again shows that this is a systemic problem. We can see solutions to it. People at every level can see some solutions to it, but the solutions tend to cross over jurisdictional boundaries. They tend to cross over sources of funding and things like that. Every level can point to another level and say, it's your responsibility. And there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for bringing people together to cross those barriers together.
Anything further from members of council? Anything in closing before I call the vote? Councillor Wheeldon?
Thank you, Mayor Ostrander. I'll just say that this motion is just about trying to take the first steps to change what we can change within a systems problem to bring those levels together.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeldon. Your first, therefore, statement is, be it resolved that the municipality of Brighton initiate an intermunicipal ad hoc committee to examine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Who at the municipality will undertake that role?
I would volunteer.
I'm so happy to hear that. And we will take you up on that offer, and I'm sure staff is happy to hear it as well. Anything further for members of council? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We have nothing listed under unfinished business, which brings us to bylaws. The only bylaw before us is the appointment of an interim deputy mayor. It's moved by Councillor Fredis. And it's seconded by acting deputy mayor Rowley, but I wonder if Councillor Wright would be willing to second that. Thank you. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to appoint a bylaw appointment of an interim deputy mayor. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to reports and minutes of advisory committees of council and review teams. The first is the Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting of June 14th. It's moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley. That council received the June 14th, 2023 Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Next is Health Services Advisory. It's moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley. The council received the July 6th Health Services Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Community Events and Civic Awards. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley. The council received the August 15th, 2023 minutes of the Community Events and Awards Advisory Committee as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Applefest Advisory. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley. That council received the August 15th, 2023 minutes of the Applefest Advisory Committee meeting as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Accessibility. It's moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley and seconded by Councillor Fredis. The council received the June 9th, 2023 Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And then a recommendation from the Accessibility Committee meeting of September 8th. Moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Fredis, that as recommended by the Accessibility Advisory Committee, council directs staff to add $50,000 to the budget to be specifically used for accessibility improvements of Brighton businesses, organizations, and service providers as a cost-sharing program to be developed in 2024 based on staff recommendations for consideration during budget deliberations. Is there any discussion? When we say for consideration during budget deliberation, is that intended to refer it to budget? Yeah, staff are okay with that wording? Any discussion then? Those in favor? Being none opposed, the motion's carried. Heritage Advisory, moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, that council received the July 10th, 2023 Heritage Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And we have two recommendations coming from the September 11th Heritage Advisory Committee. The first is moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright, that as recommended by the Heritage Advisory Committee, council directs staff to solicit approval from the property owner of the Orland Mill for installation of the historical plaque. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And a motion from Councillor Fredis, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, that as recommended by the Heritage Advisory Committee, Council. Okay, Councillor Fredis, this being your motion, do you want one or two? And if one, then we'll discuss the blank. Direct staff to explore suitable locations for the placement of the train station and car shed historic plaque. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We have no reports, minutes of statutory committees, boards, or external agencies, which brings us to correspondence, direction items, endorsements, communications, petitions. And the only one comes from the Canadian Association of Retired Peoples. And it's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, that council support the request from Louise War, Executive Committee Chair, CARP, to proclaim October 1st as National Seniors Day, whereas Canadian Association of Retired Persons is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization with over 325,000 members committed to a new vision of aging for Canada, promoting social change that will bring financial security, equitable access to healthcare, and freedom from discrimination and ageism. And whereas CARP's mandate is to promote and protect the interests, rights, and quality of life for all Canadians as we age. And whereas the date of Tuesday, October 1st was selected to raise awareness and participate in the newly recognized National Seniors Day instituted by the federal government in 2011 to celebrate the continuing contribution of Canada's seniors. And whereas the contributions of the seniors of Brighton have helped make our city a leading age-friendly community in Canada. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Mayor Brian Ostrander, do hereby declare October 1st, 2023 as National Seniors Day in the municipality of Brighton. Is there any discussion? As the mover, Councillor Wright, would you be okay if we change city to community? And Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, you okay with that? Anything further? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to FYI correspondence, and the only item is the update from Northumberland County. With a motion moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Fredis, that council received the Northumberland County update September 5th to the 15th, 2023 for information. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to question period. I see no one on Zoom yet. Mr. Green, do you have any questions with anything on tonight's agenda? Thank you. And so before we proceed to read the motion to go into closed session, we will take a 10-minute recess. We will reconvene at 7:24 p.m. And Councillor Wheeldon, will you please wish Mrs. Wheeldon a happy birthday for us all? And for the people who are attending by YouTube, when we close out the YouTube channel for our closed session, we will not be returning to YouTube for the open session at the end of the meeting. Thank you.